All right, get ready. We're going deep today into the fascinating world of Cornelius Van Til's epistemology.
Epistemology.
Basically, how we think about knowledge.
Ah, right. Van Til. A huge name in Christian apologetics. He really shook things up.
Big time. And that's what we're going to explore today.
This isn't just about, defending Christianity. It's about rethinking how humans know anything at all. Pretty radical stuff.
Definitely radical. And that's where the debate gets interesting. Because some people say he was an idealist, meaning our minds kind of create reality.
Yeah, that's a simplified way to put it.
But others insist, no, he was a realist.
Yeah.
He believed in a real world outside our heads.
So we've got these two blog posts we're diving into today. One from Apologetics Central, big Van Til fans.
Right, and another from Van Tilian Fire. Despite the name, they actually offer some different perspectives.
Yeah, it's going to be a good debate. But before we get into the nitty-gritty, let's define our terms. Idealism, at its core, it says that what we perceive is shaped by our minds.
Right. It's not like we're seeing the world directly as it is, almost like looking through a kaleidoscope. Reality's all fragmented and rearranged.
Yeah, a bit like that. Realism, on the other hand, insists we perceive the world as it truly is.
So no mental gymnastics required.
Yeah.
What you see is what you get.
Exactly. That's the basic idea.
Okay, so idealism versus realism, round one. But then our sources throw a curveball. Representative realism. What's that all about?
Well, it tries to find a middle ground.
Okay, so it says, yes, there's a real world out there, but...
But it acknowledges that our senses create representations of those objects, and those representations affect how we perceive them.
There's the real Niagara Falls, right?
Yeah.
All majestic and powerful. But what we actually experience is our senses' version of it.
Yes, shaped by things like distance and lighting.
Even our mood that day could affect it.
Absolutely, we're not making things up. But it's not a completely raw, unfiltered experience either.
Right, right. Okay, so that's representative realism. Now, critics, especially those from the Thomistic school of thought, they look at Van Til and yell, idealism. They get pretty nervous because...
Well, for them, if our minds are creating God, what kind of God is that?
A very human one.
And that raises all sorts of theological issues.
Makes sense. But the Apologetics Central blog pushes back. They argue that theistic realism is a better way to understand Van Til. What makes that different?
Okay, so theistic realism says that, yes, there's a real world out there, but the key is that the subject-object relationship, how we know anything, it's grounded in God.
God is the architect of everything, both the knower and the known.
Exactly. The mind and the world it perceives, both created by God.
So it's not like a human mind shaping a formless void. It's more like God creating both the sculptor and the clay.
A good analogy.
But why does any of this matter? Why should we care what philosophical box Van Til fits into?
Because if we reject theistic realism, we're left with some shaky ground for knowledge. Our sources point out two main alternatives. One is the human mind as the ultimate authority,
Okay.
which leads to what's called the egocentric predicament.
The egocentric predicament. Sounds like a bad day I had once. Trapped in my own thoughts, wondering if anything was real.
Haha. Well, imagine you're stuck in a soundproof room. All you hear is your own voice.
Okay, I'm with you.
You can't be sure if anyone's outside. If your words are reaching anyone, that's the egocentric predicament. Our minds become the sole judge of reality.
And we're left wondering if anything outside ourselves matches up.
Exactly.
Okay, so that's option one. Sounds pretty lonely. What's the other alternative?
Objective reality as the ultimate authority. But then we have a new problem. How do our limited, finite minds grasp those objective truths?
Right, it's like trying to download the entire internet using dial-up. The capacity just isn't there.
Precisely.
So either we're trapped in our own heads, or we're trying to comprehend this infinitely complex reality with brains meant for remembering where we put our keys. Not great choices.
Not great at all. Welcome back. Last time we were talking about idealism versus realism, with representative realism trying to find some middle ground.
And we saw how rejecting theistic realism leaves us with some pretty tricky problems.
Definitely. Either stuck in our heads or our brains trying to download the entire universe on dial-up.
Yeah, not great options. But Van Til says, hold on, there's another way. What if we ground knowledge in God?
Exactly. He argues that God, as the creator of both our minds and the world, well, he provides the connection. It's like God designed this puzzle where all the pieces fit perfectly because he made both the pieces and the picture they form.
I like that. So instead of chaos, there's harmony. Because God designed it all. That's pretty comforting, actually. But how does theistic realism actually work in real life? It can't just be some philosophical thought experiment, right?
No, not at all. Van Til believed this had huge implications for how we understand everything. Take Greg Bahnsen, another big Van Til guy.
Okay.
He contrasts the Christian and non-Christian views of knowledge. For the Christian, our ability to know things, it's not some accident. It's rooted in the fact that God created us in his image.
Designed to understand his world.
Right. But what about people who don't believe in God? Are they just wandering around in a fog of unknowing?
Yeah, good question.
That's where it gets interesting. Van Til would say that even unbelievers, they can have true knowledge. Think about it. They can still do science, build bridges, write poetry. They're still operating within God's created order, even if they don't acknowledge the source.
So they're kind of like borrowing Wi-Fi without knowing who's providing the signal.
Perfect analogy. They benefit from God's design, even if they attribute it to something else. And this is one of the strengths of theistic realism. It explains how we can have genuine knowledge, even if it's partial or incomplete.
Okay.
Our source material talks about how even babies have a basic grasp of truth. They know things fall down, they recognize their parents, they haven't read Descartes or Kant, but they're still making sense of the world.
That's true. My niece figured out how to steal cookies from the top shelf way before she learned her ABCs. Some knowledge is just there. But if we have this basic understanding built in already, why do we need the Bible? Where does special revelation fit into all of this?
Great question. Van Til wouldn't say the Bible gives us specific knowledge about, like, the natural world, like the chemical composition of water or the laws of physics.
Okay.
We discover those things through observation and science. But what the Bible does is provide the framework for understanding all knowledge correctly.
So it's like the Bible doesn't teach you how to build a house, but it tells you who the architect is, what kind of house he intended, and why he built it in the first place.
Exactly. It gives us the blueprint, the owner's manual for reality. There's this great metaphor in the blog post about a searchlight illuminating Niagara Falls.
Okay, I'm intrigued.
Imagine you're stumbling around in the dark, just catching glimpses of the falls. Then suddenly, this powerful light shines, revealing the whole scene.
Oh, I see.
That's what special revelation does for our understanding of the world.
So the Bible's like a cosmic flashlight, illuminating the bigger picture. But does that mean unbelievers are stuck in the dark? Like they can't see anything at all?
It's not that they can't see anything. They can still acquire knowledge about the world. The problem is they're trying to interpret it all within a framework that denies the true source.
They're looking at the puzzle, but without the picture on the box.
Exactly. They might be able to force some pieces together, but they miss the full image.
So their knowledge is limited. Even if it seems functional on the surface, they're missing that connection to the designer.
Right. And that brings us to another key concept in Van Til's thought, presuppositions.
Presuppositions. Ooh, that word always makes my head spin a little. Can you break it down for us?
Sure. Imagine you're wearing those old school 3D glasses with the red and blue lenses. Everything looks tinted, right?
Right.
That's kind of like a presupposition, a deep-seated belief that shapes how we see everything.
So it's not just about having different opinions. We're literally seeing the world through different lenses.
Exactly. Van Til argued that everyone has presuppositions, whether they realize it or not, and the big difference is whether those presuppositions are rooted in faith or unbelief.
So for a Christian, the ultimate presupposition is that God exists. He created the world, and he's revealed himself in the Bible, and that shapes how they see everything. Science, history, ethics, the whole shebang.
Precisely. But for someone who rejects God, their presupposition might be that the material world is all there is, or that human reason is the ultimate authority. And that leads to very different interpretations of the same evidence.
It's like trying to understand Shakespeare. If you only speak Klingon, you're going to miss a lot of the nuance.
Great analogy.
Oh.
And that's why Van Til was so skeptical of what he called neutral or autonomous reason. He argued there's no such thing as a starting point that's completely free from presuppositions. We always come to the table with certain beliefs already in place.
So it's not about abandoning reason or logic, but about recognizing that our reasoning starts somewhere, and that somewhere is ultimately rooted in faith or unbelief.
Exactly. And this leads us to one of the most profound and controversial aspects of Van Til's thought. The idea that Christian faith isn't just one belief among many. It's the only foundation for true knowledge.
Welcome back to our deep dive. We've been exploring Van Til's epistemology, and it's been a wild ride. We've seen how theistic realism offers a pretty compelling alternative to the problems of idealism and realism. But of course, not everyone's on board.
Right. Van Til's ideas have definitely sparked some controversy.
So let's hear it. What are some of the main criticisms of theistic realism?
One of the big ones is the circularity argument.
Circularity?
Critics say it's like using God to prove God, a kind of philosophical shell game.
Okay, I see where they're coming from. So it's like the Bible's true because God said so, and we know God exists because the Bible says so. Seems a bit like pulling yourself up by your bootstraps.
That's the basic idea. But Van Til's defenders argue that the circularity isn't a fatal flaw. They acknowledge they're starting with the assumption that God exists and has revealed himself. But they say those assumptions are the only ones that actually make sense of reality.
So it's more like saying, I can see because I have eyes,
Yeah.
and I know I have eyes because I can see. There's a circularity there, but it's not illogical.
Right. They're not arguing for blind faith. They're saying, look at the evidence, consider the alternatives, and see if believing in God doesn't make more sense than anything else.
Okay, that makes sense. So circularity, check. What other criticisms are out there?
Another common one is the charge of fideism.
Fideism. Refresh my memory.
Basically, the idea that theistic realism relies too much on faith and doesn't give enough credit to reason or evidence.
Like, just believe, don't think. And I get why that makes people nervous. Blind faith hasn't always led to good things.
Definitely not. But theistic realists would strongly disagree with that characterization.
Oh.
They'd say that for them, faith isn't a blind leap. It's a reasoned trust in God's revelation.
So you don't turn off your brain. You just ground your reasoning in a solid foundation. God's truth.
Exactly. It's not an either. It's both hand. Faith and reason work together.
Each one informing and supporting the other.
Right. Van Til would even say that the Bible itself tells us to use our minds, to study God's world, to think deeply.
He wouldn't be anti-reason then.
Not at all. In fact, he'd argue that theistic realism leads to a more robust use of reason, because it's anchored in truth.
Okay, so we've got circularity and fideism. Any other challenges we should know about?
One more that comes up a lot is the exclusivity argument. Critics say that theistic realism is too narrow. It shuts out other perspectives.
And claims a monopoly on truth.
Which can lead to arrogance and intolerance.
Yeah, I can see that concern, especially in today's world.
Yeah.
We don't want to shut down dialogue or pretend we have all the answers. So how do Van Til's supporters address this?
They acknowledge that they're making exclusive truth claims. They're not backing down from what they believe. But they also point out that every worldview makes exclusive claims, even those that preach tolerance and inclusivity. If you believe something is true, you're saying other things aren't.
So it's not about silencing other voices or being superior. It's about confidently stating what you believe and engaging in respectful dialogue even when you disagree.
Exactly. Van Til and his followers would say, let's put all our presuppositions on the table, examine them critically, and see which ones hold up.
A call for open and honest conversation, not an echo chamber. I like that. Okay, so we've talked a lot about the criticisms of theistic realism, but what about its strengths? What makes this view so compelling for people?
I think for many, it's the sense of coherence and integration. It connects all the dots, from the smallest particle to the vastness of the cosmos, and puts everything within the context of God's design.
It's like finding that missing puzzle piece.
Yeah.
And suddenly the whole picture snaps into focus.
Exactly. And this coherence, it's not just intellectually satisfying, it's emotionally grounding too. It provides meaning and purpose that goes beyond our limited human perspective.
And that connection to a larger purpose, it also gives us a foundation for morality and ethics.
Right.
If God is the source of truth and goodness, we have a standard for judging right and wrong.
Absolutely. In a world where everything seems relative, theistic realism offers a firm anchor, a way to ground our values in something beyond ourselves.
Another strength, I think, is the humility it encourages. By recognizing God as the ultimate source of all knowledge, we're reminded of our own limitations. It fosters wonder and gratitude.
Beautifully said. It's an attitude of intellectual curiosity that never gets old, because we're always discovering new things about God's creation.
And it encourages dependence on God, too. It reminds us that we're not all-knowing beings. We're creatures who depend on our Creator for everything, even our ability to know and understand.
Such a crucial point. And that dependence, it's not a weakness. It's a source of strength and freedom. It allows us to step back from the burden of having to figure everything out ourselves and rest in God's wisdom.
Well, we've covered a lot of ground today. We've explored theistic realism, wrestled with the criticisms, and celebrated its strengths. It's been quite a journey.
It has. And as we wrap up, I want to leave you with one final thought. If all truth is ultimately God's truth, how does that change how we approach everything in life? Our relationships, our work, our passions, even just experiencing the world around us.
That's a great question to ponder, and we encourage you to keep exploring God's truth wherever it leads. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.